So this is just a dialogue. This isn't a debate or something formal about it. I actually don't do those type of discussions. I just think that they're not as productive as just a friendly back and forth. I heard probably 3/4 of the discussion that you had with John the other day, and I felt that not just in trying to convince you, but trying to convince others who happen to be where you are, it would benefit both of us to have a conversation.
Right, well that was actually the reason why I spoke to John about it in the first place, is that others that would listen would benefit in the position that I was putting forward, really, is that a person can be, whatever title you want to put on it, righteous among nations or a Noahide, and they do not need to convert, because certainly if they're not in a position where they can't convert.
So, I'm in love with the Torah. Okay? The reason I believe in God is because of Torah. I don't believe in Torah because of God. At the same time, I do believe in what Torah sanctions. So Torah does sanction the existence of elders, judges, a court, to build consensus on how we keep ceremonial laws, but not to develop anything metaphysical that's authoritative. So the first question I ask myself when looking for a belief system, something I call a religion, is it sanctioned by Torah? And by Torah, colloquially, I mean the 5 books of Moses, but specifically the commandments within the Torah. So this is why I encourage people that if they're looking for something... Now, John has an interesting background because he used to be Catholic. People who come from the Catholic Church typically were not so involved in Bible study, in Torah study. I'm not sure what initially drew him to Judaism. I feel that I worship the same God now as I did when I was a Christian. It's the God of Israel and his guidebook for individual moral training that we call Torah. So I ask, what does God want me to do according to the 5 books of Moses? And it seems that God wants anyone who's going to worship him, to serve him in the way that he wants to be served. And that's through obedience. In other words, he wants you to just keep his instructions. For our sake, ultimately. Because I think if we keep these laws, in particular the ethical ones, but not throwing away the ceremonial ones, that our lives will improve. We'll leave this world a little better than we found it. And that's it. Now, there's other ideas that people could incorporate into their theology. But that's the basis. The basis is that the way you worship God, the only way you worship God, according to the 5 books of Moses, is by keeping his instructions. That's my position.
Right. So I suppose that's the same position, really, that I presented to John, that a person who is, whichever name you want to attach to it, a person who's not a convert, they can still act ethically and as suggested to...
forget about the word convert, because the word convert doesn't appear in the Torah. Okay? God communes with these people via a covenant. So, are you saying people who decide not to join into an agreement with God? Is that what you're talking about as people who choose not to convert?
No, I mean, each individual, like covenant, it depends on which covenant you would be talking about then, obviously. Obviously the covenant Abraham made is very different from the covenant that was made at Sinai. So
it seems like the Sinai covenant was an extension to the Abrahamic covenant, because the Abrahamic covenant was that God was going to be Abraham's God and Abraham would walk in his ways. Now clearly Abraham didn't have all the laws, and then there's something called Zchut Avot, that because of the merits of Abraham, God gave the Hebrews and even the mixed multitude the opportunity to leave Egypt, and he added to the initial covenant with Abraham by adding more laws. So it's just building on the initial Abrahamic covenant. I mean, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still the patriarchs of our religion because it's the same covenant.
That's one aspect. But the Torah says that by these commandments you shall live, and so it was obviously Abraham was living by a set of commandments. It says in Genesis that he says he kept commandments, statutes, laws, instructions, whatever. And it's actually
sure, it could have been 8 laws, 9 laws, 10 laws. For sure, at least according to the text, it wasn't 613.
To my mind, these are very much cause and effect type obedience. So no stealing, no murdering, no committing adultery. They're very obvious that there's cause and effect to somebody in real life. And there's no, as you say, there's no any metaphysical things are really no coming into the Torah. So therefore the idea like doing good for heaven, it's obviously it's doing good for this life that seems to be what's been spoken about. And so therefore a person, regardless of whether they're in, I mean to be honest, right? What was you would have to ask, what was the point of the covenant of Abraham? Because if the Jews are really no interested in living in their land, because obviously they can go back now, right? And so if that was so important, why the Jews all went, this is fantastic, we've all went back. So if somebody's saying, well, I've got a covenant with God, well, if this covenant was about the land, we're going to get land, and this is how we're going to live in the land, then it'd be very easy, just simple for a Gentile to say, well, listen, really, you're not keeping the covenant. And that's one of the things I was saying, it's an advantage to be in, making a decision, to whichever name you want to attach to it, someone who's not converted to Judaism, is because these laws are no binding, such as Shabbat, for instance, which is very serious. If the person desecrates Shabbat, then it says the sacrifice from the Gentile can be accepted, but the sacrifice from a Jew who desecrates Shabbat shall not. So it's very serious in my mind. It's quite a serious commitment. That's one of the serious commitments.
Okay, hold on. Just.
And then last year the covenant thing. So as far as the covenant goes, I mean that's right. That it's understood that so Judah was a tribe in a nation, and so their concept of religion at that time in the Torah is evidently very different from the idea we've now developed in the West under Christianity, of where there's basically God should be available to everybody, should be able to walk in. I mean, because that's one of the things that really I wanted to speak to John about, is because a lot of people obviously that seem disappointed. Oh, I want to convert, I want to go along, and the rabbi doesn't reply, and I'm not getting any replies to emails, and I've tried going along, and then I feel people are being friendly.
Let me respond to what you said earlier. Okay, first you said...
So my position is that, well, really, I wouldn't get bent out of shape.
You said that the commandments were only meant to be kept in the land. And now we know that the Torah was given... I'm sorry?
Well, I'm not saying that it's only meant to be kept in the land. There are some evidently that are only supposed to be in the temples. But it says when you enter into the land, you shall keep these laws. So a big chunk...
No, hold on. Right. Yeah, those are ceremonial laws. In other words, commandments that have to do with the land have to be kept in the land. But Israel was being adjudicated for not keeping commandments even in the wilderness.
The horrors, by contrast, the position that a person who becomes Jewish, by contrast, that person is in a much worse position if they fail to keep Shabbat, because their sacrifice is not accepted. It's not acceptable.
They're actually in a better position according to rabbinic law. Because I know that you're bringing in a lot of rabbinic ideas, but according to rabbinic Judaism, if a ger toshav breaks any one of the 7 laws without a pre-warning and with one witness, he's decapitated. So you would have to bring in later developed ideas to think that God in some way entertained the idea of a different standard, because God in the Torah just gives one standard. He says that if you keep my laws, you'll be blessed. Like you said, you'll live by them, and if you don't, you'll be cursed. And that's all he says.
But he says that to a specific group of people at a specific time, and it's very and he's certainly not addressing all the people who are not at Sinai. And so presumably then, the people who are not at Sinai, the rest of the nations, they've been instructed, or certainly should have been instructed, being descendants of Noah.
But it doesn't say this in the Torah. As a matter of fact, it doesn't say this in the Torah in terms of a distinction made between God's relationship with people who stood on Mount Sinai and God's relationship with Canaanites or people outside of the covenant. It seems that God only has one standard. As a matter of fact, when he makes that statement of choose life that you may live, i.e. choose this law, this is already in Parshat Re'eh. They're away from Mount Sinai. In other words, he's sealing the deal.
But he's making that deal with those specific people who are there at that specific time. He's not making it with all of mankind. That's what I'm saying. The rest of mankind who are descended from Noah.
But it doesn't say.
It doesn't say, but there's lots of things, like the rabbinic thing, like you just said rabbinic, right? So if we're going to accept what's rabbinic, like for instance, Jews don't eat cheeseburgers, and that's not in the Torah, right?
Yeah, but that's a legal precept.
Yes.
But it's not a metaphysical one. Anything dealing with what pleases God or satisfies his standard for humans to live by is a metaphysical concept. That has to be mentioned in Torah to be considered as divine. In other words, the court doesn't deal with metaphysical issues. If they did, well, they would just vote that the Messiah should come tomorrow, right? The court only deals with practical matters. So the oral law only deals with practical matters. Now, the rabbis could have opinions. I have many opinions. But what they shouldn't do is offer these opinions as a viable alternative to God's standard, God's only standard in Torah for people trying to get close to God.
So when you say metaphysical, you're not speaking about heaven there. You're just talking about what pleases God and what makes him feel like...
Metaphysical concepts, things that aren't necessarily practical, that aren't tangible.
Right, but beyond what pleases God, there's not really a lot spoken about in the Torah itself, is it? There's no heaven and no hell. So if we're keeping it what pleases God, well, we're coming up to Yom Kippur quite soon. So, I mean, in Yom Kippur in the service, they speak about Nineveh and talking about let men God on call earnestly. It says men. It doesn't say Jews like Jews. It says let men call. So the people at Nineveh were very obviously able to please God, or the place would have been wiped out.
Nobody knows who the people of Nineveh were. I'm of the opinion that they were people who accepted Torah and fell away. And I don't think there's anything in the text that contradicts that, because no one knows of the great Noahide king of Nineveh, right? Because it seems that it was the king of Nineveh who started the repentance. So
No, Cyrus was a great king and a Messiah, and he wasn't Jewish, was he?
But it didn't say that he was necessarily righteous. It says that God used him, and he wasn't a Messiah.
Well, if you want, but if we start to draw these wee lines, then to be blunt, there's no Jews in the Torah.
Correct.
There are no Jews. So
there's only people in the covenant. Exactly.
So to say to people to be Jewish, like, so we could not find in the Torah a person walking around with a kippah on.
Fine.
And obeying.
I mean, the high priest did.
But individuals, like in the Torah, a person could use the name of God.
Correct. And according to Jewish law, even today people could use the name of God inside Jerusalem, if they knew the actual pronunciation.
So they could use it, and then, so today, so what's been advocated by somebody is like, be Jewish. So really what's been advocated is let's join this minefield, a political maelstrom, where like people have got various arguments where the Israeli court can't even decide what a Jew is. They can't even decide what a Jew is. So come into this where
I'm not even trying to go there. I'm just trying to stick with Torah. I'm just trying to stick with Torah.
Right. So to stick with Torah, my point is there were evidently people who had descended from Noah, from his family, and Abraham had obviously learnt these laws. These people were obviously acceptable enough that David's ancestors came from the Moabites, right? So there was some way that it was possible for me to accept that. So Leah as well, obviously wasn't descended from Abraham. And so if Jews say it comes through their mother, so obviously nothing could have come through Leah then, because her ancestors were not involved in the promise, the covenant that Abraham's was.
That's a rabbinic notion, first of all. The notion that Jewishness, or Chabad teaches having a Jewish soul, that this travels through the mother, is a rabbinic idea bundled in Kabbalah. in terms of
the point is that's what people
what Chabad teaches.
Invited to join. People are not being invited to join the pure religion of Moses. They're being invited to be Jewish, to join this new thing.
No, forget about being Jewish or the word Jewish. I believe that the only way to properly read the 5 books of Moses is that if someone wants to worship the God of Israel and follow the God of Israel, he must or she must take upon themselves his commandments, all of them, or at least the ones that they're able to keep. That's it. That's the way we worship God. To worship means to serve Him.
That's become that's kind of like I have arguments with Jehovah's Witnesses quite a bit actually, and I tell them they've appropriated from the Jews. They've stolen the title, and they say we are as witnesses in the earth, and they've actually stolen the claim to being Israel. Their governing body stole that, and they claim the right to be the real Jews. So the same way, if somebody says the God of Israel, right?
Well, there are no real Jews. There are people who keep God's commandments.
What happened to the God of Adam? He's not just the God of Israel. He was the God of Adam, he was the God of Abraham, the God of Noah, and Jacob. None of these people were Jews.
Right.
So
there's clearly a progression. There's a progression from Adam on. In other words, if Adam would have existed till Mount Sinai, Adam himself would have been keeping all those commandments as well. They saw it as a progression. It's the same God, but he was revealing what was initially lost. Well, the understanding is that Adam walked with God. He had Torah because he had the instructions from God. God would speak to him, whatever those instructions were. Now, after the fall of man, and I don't have a problem using the word fall of man, we see him use Noah and Abraham, and we slowly see a progression. Slowly, Noah is considered a righteous man in his generation. But it seems that Abraham was even more righteous because we see him arguing for the sake of people that he never even met, arguing with God, till ultimately it culminated with what I believe is a fulfillment of prophecy in Genesis chapter 3, that it's pointing to Exodus chapter 20, that God would eventually remake that broken line, that broken bond with humanity on Mount Sinai by giving us his instructions again, by making the connection with man, so man no longer has to figure out how to be ethical on his own. Now we have God's instructions to keep us consistently ethical, right? But it's a progression. One can't say that I'm going to go back and live like Noah did, or I'm going to go back and live like Abraham did. No, because that ship has sailed. Now we're on the God of Israel 2.0. It's the same God of Israel, but his will is made manifest fully now, post-Sinai. We can't go back. And that's what I think people...
Well, to the people, it says there'll be a nation of priests, right? So a priest surely has to minister to somebody, right? And then if he says to Abraham...
Wait, hold on.
It says to Abraham, through your children, the nations of the earth will be blessed, right? So it seems fairly evident, and that's how I view it, that for whatever reason, God... And for whatever way, he created traditions within Judaism that means today we can reference what the Torah is, right? It's been properly copied down, and so we have this, and we've got evidence we can trace back to escape from false religion. But I think, to say, so Mr. Epstein was Jewish, and so are many other bad people that have been in the news. So to say that they have got a better covenant than somebody that's a Gentile, and to say that somebody that's going to, but they're in the nation of Israel, fully fledged. They probably raised bar mitzvah and everything, right? So to say that they've got a better covenant than the Gentile who chose to act ethically, as has been set out by the rabbis throughout time. And the guy Naaman, right? He wasn't Jewish, so and he's living a long time ago. It's not just like some invented thing. That's my point. This is not something that was invented in the last 50 years by Chabad or something, right? But I mean, that guy Naaman was not. He was living in the land, and if you read commentaries, who was this guy? He's somebody that didn't fully convert. He kept the 7 laws of Noah, and
it doesn't say that. Wait, hold on. It doesn't say that he kept the 7 laws of Noah, or he didn't adhere to the full Torah standards.
Some commentaries do.
No, forget about the commentaries. Yeah, but the text doesn't say that.
What we do know is there was a person there. There was a person there who did not convert.
But it didn't.
So what I'm saying is,
Yeah, but the notion of conversion doesn't exist. In Torah and in Tanakh, the notion of conversion does not exist. It's aligning yourself with Israel and entering a covenant with God. Now, Epstein may have been a halachic Jew, but for sure he was in no covenant with God. He probably didn't even believe in God. You can be a Jew according to halacha, and it has nothing to do with anything metaphysical or anything spiritual. It just means that you're a citizen of the nation of Israel. In other words, if they live around the Sanhedrin, that Sanhedrin could put them to death in the land of Israel. But it doesn't mean that God holds them special. Now, a Gentile who has taken upon himself Torah, just like Israel and the mixed multitude took upon themselves Torah, clearly is in a greater position than someone who just happens to be halachically Jewish. In other words, someone could be halachically Jewish and not in a covenant with God, and someone could technically be in a covenant with God and not halachically Jewish. Because being halachically Jewish, i.e., being Jewish because your mother's Jewish, is a rabbinic notion. That means there's nothing metaphysical about it. It's there for legal reasons.
But the issue is that a lot of people feel they need to convert or they can't stay as a no-hider or a...
There's no conversion in Torah. We're talking about Torah. There's entering into the covenant.
This is the issue. This is the issue that people are actually really dealing with today, and that's what's the choice that's in front of them, and that's what we're talking about. People should have convert or should have stay as Ben Noah. And my point is that what would convert to, what they would convert to today is a rabbinic notion. And I respect the right of that, because I'm not going to go into somebody's house and tell them how to run it. These guys have been running the house for the last 3,500 years. So I'm not going to come along and say, listen, this is wrong and that's wrong and the other thing's wrong, right? So you have to decide, you want to join all of these new rules that we've all thought up. And there are differences between Ashkenazi and Sephardi. So halakha is different for different groups.
I mean, there's customs that are different. I mean, the halachas...
Right, but obviously, I mean, you could not carry it, it wouldn't be acceptable to break these, call them customs, in one group than it would in another. So my point is that to think about conversion and not think it through fully, and learn it, it's a minefield the person's really, like you were saying about, if you go to Israel and you say the Zohar never came down at Sinai, some groups will really go nuts. So, what I'm saying is, why would a person jump into that mixture?
I never said conversion. I want you to keep Torah fully, and that includes the ethical commandments. I mean, I think if people lived by more than 7 laws, by the bulk of the ethical laws that appear in Torah, the world would be a better place. Forget about conversion, okay? Enter into an agreement with God, that He would be your God, and you would walk in His ways, i.e. keep His laws. This has nothing to do with later developed notions. Okay, hold on. Like, someone can't take a later developed notion like the 7 laws of Noah, and then because of that later developed notion, reinterpret thousands of years of scripture that never mentioned this idea. That we have to start from the Torah and look forward, that we can't start from Midrashim and look backwards. You understand?
But you could say the same. We count 613 commandments, but we know actually there's possibly 18.
There's more.
There's more, right? So we're getting a bit picky about, was it 7, was it 9, was it 12? The point is that people were following ethical things. So that's what in my mind. I prefer to call it righteous among nations or righteous Gentile or whatever. But it's the same thing. Somebody that decides, yes, this God that Israel follows, not the God of Israel. Well, the God that Israel follows, yes, to align myself with them, that they follow the one true God. And these commandments, like, I look at it like this. I thought, how would I try and understand this? And like, people nowadays, they meet relatives from around the world, right, that they've never met because like Facebook and family ancestry and such, right? So in the same way, Gentiles, in my mind today, they meet Jews they've preserved something. So it's like they've got photographs and books and everything of this family history that the Gentiles not got. And so this is the Torah, and now the Gentile can say, right, I can walk in this way. And to my mind, all the metaphysical stuff is secondary. The reason I studied Torah is because, like, I've got kids, right? And it says, and it's for this world, right? I don't know, like, who knows what happens in the ether? Don't know. What I do know is people's kids end up in jail, right? They end up on drugs, right? They end up falling out with their parents, right? All kinds of problems. So it says, by these commandments you shall live. And so that's why I study Judaism still. I've got 3 kids, they're all grown up, and they stay together nice as a family. And I want to continue to keep what I started going in the right way, like guiding an arrow, which apparently is what Torah means. It's something to do with the flow, like somebody would guide So that's my perspective. Metaphysical, I'm really not.
So you made the statement that in Torah or in Tanakh, like we see Gentiles keeping some ethical standard without adhering completely to God's law. Now, any example of I see people being considered in some way righteous without God's law, because we know God gave no other command in Torah but what appears in Torah. So I would consider that being ethical by coincidence versus being consistently ethical.
No, I think there's been kind of the idea has been made clear that it's not.
But someone's going to say that because we see Gentiles being considered ethical in Torah, that they must have had the 7 laws. I mean, that's a big leap, right? Because you're saying that God gave another standard.
Right, but if we read all the stories in Genesis, right, we can clearly see there certainly was these 7 laws, because the things that are mentioned are all in stories about this is what was wrong, what was bad. This is so we can kind of see, right, that these commandments, and it clearly says in Genesis.
Outside of murder. So can you give me an example outside of murder?
I was thinking then.
Because in the book of Ezekiel it says that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah.
When Abraham goes and the guy thinks that he discovers his wife. He's like, oh my gosh, what you've done! So the guy's obviously aware that the concept of adultery is wrong. So it's a huge problem. The guy's like, what a terrible thing. So that's an example there. And
so adultery is not necessarily part of the Noahide laws as it's understood. It's really sexual immorality. But even the rabbis say that
we see that in the story. Sodom and Gomorrah. So the point is in that group. So sexual immorality, we can see.
So there's in the book of Ezekiel, it says why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and it said because they were cruel. Had nothing to do with them breaking any of the laws of Noah. At least according to the book of Ezekiel, you can look it up after the talk. There's different standards. For adultery.
A lot of people today look at sexual promiscuity and think, it's like the days of Noah. And my understanding is, the thing is that there was that, yes, but it's mixed with cruelty, is the problem. The cruelty as well as the problems that were going on.
There's a different standard for sexual immorality for Gentiles than there is for Jews. And the Rambam brings it down. There's a completely different thing. This is why it's hard to just take the 7 Noahide laws, the basic 7 Noahide laws that really don't even require you to believe in God, by the way. It just tells you to curse God.
That's not true, because there's rabbis are really, that's really been discussed, that somebody that just keeps them by coincidence, as you're saying, that doesn't account for anything. So what I'm talking about a person that says, yes, I'm not talking about just somebody that keeps them by coincidence, I'm talking about somebody that says, yes, there is a God, there's God able, and this is how I'm beginning to follow this God, is by these 7 commandments. And as I said to John the other night,
yeah, but that's not how a modern day rabbi may have said that. But
you can continue to study Torah to see.
You can research this afterwards, okay? But nowhere does it say that a ger toshav has to believe in God or have a relationship with God in any way. All it says, and you can look up the 7 Noahide laws as they appear, it says that
it tells you Psalm 2 that that they should turn, it's talking about the Gentiles should turn and be admonished and arm themselves in purity, doesn't it?
I didn't understand.
So there's so what I'm saying is there are repeated calls throughout the Tanakh that Gentiles themselves, even wicked Gentiles, should turn towards God. So lots of stuff.
Oh no, it doesn't say that. Wait, hold on. Nations in Torah and Tanakh doesn't always mean Gentiles. It could be nations outside of the nation of Israel. For example, in Isaiah 56, it talks about, let not the Nochri, the foreigner, say that God would exclude him from his commandments and his covenants. In other words, someone could be outside of the land of Israel and still be in a covenant with God. That one shouldn't assume that every time that it's talking about nations in Tanakh, that it's talking about B'nai Noach.
So what about First Kings? The prayer is that they'll hear the prayer of the Gentiles and answer them, so that all the nations will know. So that's clearly, you can't get any clearer than that. So if this person is a Gentile, in 1 Kings 38:43, saying so hear these people's prayer.
Yeah, that's in English. Nations, but not Gentiles. In Hebrew, There's no word for Gentile in Hebrew.
So these nations are obviously no Jews. These nations are obviously no Jews. That's my point.
There's Jews or people in the covenant amongst the nations. And this is actually one opinion in the Talmud, that all these nations will eventually convert to Judaism. When it says that they will worship me with pure lips, it means pure lips means Hebrew. That one opinion is that all these prophecies are talking about these nations eventually converting to Judaism, not keeping some other standard.
Right, that's right. I can agree with that. Yes, but obviously, I mean, we have to be real, and at this point in time, that is just not something that's possible. Because, as I says to John, where would the armed police that I saw on that Saturday? It was Shabbat. So who's was going to drive the car, and then who's going to start deciding at what lines you draw?
Well, that's where faith
on
comes in. I mean,
the point is that in this world we live in at this point in time, not everybody can be Jewish. So as a progression, I can understand, right? Maybe.
Yeah, but forget about being Jewish. You're saying that in this world that we live in, but not everyone could keep God's commandments fully.
No, everybody could be Jewish. Of course.
No, forget about being Jewish. I'm talking about entering into a covenant with God to keep His commandments. You're almost making the argument.
But you're talking about a different religion because that Judaism, which is really is, I mean, like that's what people are discussing is should I convert or should I stay as I am? And my position is people can stay as they are, yes, because if you convert, then you are liable for all these rabbinic rulings in halakha. And the world is just...
Nobody is liable for breaking any rabbinic laws.
Sorry?
Nobody is liable for breaking any rabbinic laws because there's no Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin only had the authority to adjudicate laws in the land of Israel.
You could break all the rabbinic rules and walk into the synagogue and everybody's going to be happy. And the rabbis... So
I'm not saying people are going to be happy. But you're saying that God would in some way... kill you with the hands of heaven because you kill rabbinic.
No, but so what happens? Right, so you walk into shul without any kippah on, and
that's not even a rabbinic law. That's more like of a custom.
No,
right?
The point is, it's not going to work out, is it? It's not acceptable. So my point is, if a person converts and they go along to learn fully at the shul, they must comply with these things. And so obviously people that are listening on the internet are thinking, well, I can't keep that. And to my position is, that's fine. You don't have to keep all this stuff.
But according to Torah, you do. If you want to claim to worship the God of Israel, you have to keep His commandments. That's the only way you worship the God of Israel, is by keeping His commandments. You can't pick and choose what you want to keep, or then you're worshiping another God.
No, but nobody's saying that. You're not picking and choosing. His commandments are obvious.
Yeah, but the Torah makes no distinction between these commandments. The same God who said don't eat pork is the same God who said keep Shabbat.
Also says the word is man, and repeatedly it's made clear that when it says man, it just applies to all men.
Not in the Torah.
In the Torah. Well, so I don't know. So like lots of these sages have got it wrong when they've said
that's a metaphysical concept.
Man shall live by these. Man shall do this, and man shall do that. And they've. I mean, you could read.
That's a midrash. I mean, I'm familiar with that statement in the Talmud.
So the point is, it says man. It says man shall, and so like.
Okay, so that aside,
you're talking about a different religion, which is going right back to Moses.
That aside, are you willing to reinterpret what the Bible tells you that is the only way to worship God with some legend that appears in the Talmud? That would you really reinterpret older scripture by a newer legend?
I think the plain reading, I think it's very important to state the plain reading, so it's not possible to
There's a plain reading that man only means Jew?
So, no, it doesn't say that. It says that man doesn't only mean Jew. So what I've read, every commentary is when it says man, this does not mean only Jew. So therefore, it doesn't mean only Jew, it must also mean Gentiles. So if it means Gentiles, it must mean
it says ha'adam, the man, right? It means
so when it says by these man shall live, it's not just talking about Jews. It's talking about man. So, and when
you're
means
quoting
live,
a statement in the Talmud that says that when it says man versus the man, whether this means Gentile and that means Jew, the Torah doesn't make this distinction. But the Torah says that the only way to worship God is by keeping His commandments. That's all it says. That why are you using later ideas to define your religious values? You understand? The court, our sages, only had the authority on legal issues, on how do you keep Shabbat, how do you keep Yom Kippur, not whether God will secure you a place in the world to come if you keep 7 laws, not on whether there's another standard for those not born with Jewish mothers. This is outside of their pay grade. Only the Torah could deal with issues of relationship with God. Some later rabbi can't come and reinterpret the Bible for you. The Bible says what it says. So it seems like you built your religion, your theology, off of Agadah and not off of the Chumash.
No, so I mean, so when you use the word worship, so you say that, so somebody reads in the commandments, let's call it the 10 commandments, so somebody they read, thou shalt not steal. And then they see a pile of money on the table, they decide not to steal it because they believe, all right, God says I shouldn't steal that. And so you're saying that's worship then, when they do that, make that decision.
Worship means service.
Right, so but what I'm asking is, are you defining that act of choosing not to steal, are you saying that's worship?
If you're not stealing because God told you not to steal, then yes, right, that's a form of worship.
You define that particular act as a form of worship. So therefore, if we're saying every ethical action that we make is a form of worship, and we're not talking about other things such as keeping Shabbat and offering prayers and singing and whatever else, psalms and whatever else.
Ceremonial law is also worship. If you're doing what God is telling you to do, that's how you service God, right? Avodah means to service or work for God. Gods of the ancient world all had a mode of worship. Some gods required you to defecate in front of them. The God of Israel wants you to worship him by keeping his laws. And that's it. And this is all he says in the Torah. Mm-hmm. And it seems that on Mount Sinai...
No, if the 10 commandments are the 10 laws then, right? Then surely we could see that Shabbat is not for the nations, because it pretty specifically says this is my covenant between, this is the sign of the covenant between me and you, the people that he's speaking to at that time. No.
That covenant was not being offered to just Israel. It was being offered to whoever wanted to accept it. So on that mountain,
does it say
there was a mixed multitude, which, if you want to bring the rabbis into this, every commentary on this teaches that the mixed multitude outnumbered the Hebrews, and there were those of Hebrew stock. In other words, it wasn't something that was already tied to the Hebrews. The vast majority of the Hebrews, according to the rabbis, stayed behind in Egypt. So,
right, so they came out and accepted it. So what I'm saying is, so subsequent to that time, where do we see people being specifically offered this in the Torah? So the covenant was offered. What I'm saying is that covenant was offered to people specifically at that time in a specific way for a specific reason. So to say that anybody later on, so I'm saying, at what point later on do we see people being invited into this covenant then by the people who received it at Sinai?
Every minute.
In Torah.
I mean, every Jew in his life, or any person who claims to want to have a relationship with God, has to come to a point in his life that he chooses to follow God. Having a Jewish mother is not enough to bring you into some spiritual, some agreement, some covenant with God. That just makes you halachically Jewish. But the Bible doesn't end on Mount Sinai. As a matter of fact, there was a different generation that is able to enter into Israel while the previous generation died out. In other words, these individuals also had to commit themselves into the covenant. And as a matter of fact, when Israel is redeemed from Babylon and Ezra and Nehemiah bring them back to the land, they reconfirm the covenant. In other words, these guys weren't in the initial covenant, but this covenant is being reaffirmed daily by everyone who does teshuvah, anyone who comes initially to the belief in God, right? I mean, it's not something that was just for that time for those people. Mm-hmm. Right? So
to make it practical and real and something that's actually beneficial to somebody. So how would you say then? So like some guy sitting in his house, just in my situation, same thing in my situation. So the guy sitting in his house is married to somebody who's a Gentile, and in fact, let's make it the guy's decided he doesn't want to go to shul because he's seen all this stuff that's happening, and he says, you know what, listen, I'm not going to go to a reform shul because why do I want to go and sit and go to a reform shul where people are at war? Why would they want to go to a reform shul? So maybe makes a decision, I don't want to go, like me personally, I don't want to go there. What's the point? You learn about Torah to go and sit beside people who are basically at war with the Torah. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense to me. So let's say the guy's made the decision. I'm no joining this. There's a big political mess. They've got a theological mess because, like, what are reform all about? Don't know. So he decides, I'm not. So how does this person then enter into this covenant? And that'd be very constructive if we could say to people, here's how you enter into covenant without actually formally converting to Judaism then.
So there's no law that says that you have to go to a synagogue. It's definitely a great thing to unite with other Jews. I'm trying to convince you to feel bound to keep Torah. That's it. I want to strengthen your relationship with the God of Israel. That's how that person could enter the covenant. He could close his eyes and say, God, I believe you're true, and I believe your words are true. I believe in Torah. I take upon myself this Torah and enter into an agreement, into a covenant that I belong to you and you belong to me as my God, and I will walk in your ways. That's it. That's it. Now, clearly, the ideal is to join God's physical representatives on this planet, but they're very broken nowadays. Very broken. Does that mean because they're broken, you should abandon the honor of walking in God's ways and keeping His commandments and being an example to others? I don't understand that form of thinking.
No, I'm not saying that. Exactly. So the position that you've just stated is exactly the position that I...
It sounds like the rabbis have talked you out of Torah.
No, what I'm saying is, no, the position... No, we're not talking about Torah. I really...
Forget about conversion. Forget about conversion.
The position that you just stated is actually the position I was trying to convey during the conversation with John, is that I'm calling it, so that's why I don't like the word Noahide. I prefer, so righteous among nations, righteous Gentiles. So somebody who's said, right, this is the true God, the God that Israel follows, and this Torah, these instructions that they've been given, if you hear the conversation says to John, that yes, you could begin, so you learn these first things, but to continue to learn what it says in Torah. For instance, myself, I've got a list of the mitzvot, right, and read through them all as an exercise to see, can these be kept? Is it so hard as Christianity makes it? To be honest, it's not. It's not so hard. It's not some impossible law like Christians are taught. It's no, and so I agree with you on that point, that a person without converting can say to God, yes, God, I'm very sorry for everything done. I'd like to start again. Christians have copied that, from what I understand. They even kept the baptism, which presumably is a copy of the mikveh for conversion. So a person, I believe, yes, the person says, as God says, let the wicked turn from his ways, and I'll be happy. So the person turns, says, right, God, and now I'm going to live this way, right? This is where I'm going to live.
So these guys worship God in ignorance instead of worshiping God in knowledge. In other words, you know what you have to do. Just do it to the best of your ability. That's all.
Yeah, so I accept. So the point is, yes, so I would, as I said to John, yes, I would promote a person reads Torah and follows Torah. Yes, I said that to him, when he asked, and I said to him, so I'll read some things of the Talmud, but to me that's just extra details. It gives you an idea of how somebody's maybe applied something in the past. Like the example I told him about is not to embarrass people. It's a specific thing. You think, all right then, so that's also something that you shouldn't really do. But yeah, so I agree entirely with what you're saying. But my point is, I've seen people saying, oh, they'll convert through a reform show, or, oh, what am I going to do? I'm wanting some half-baked thing, this Noahide thing. And so I didn't name Noahide, so that's why I say, there must be some other name, because they're obviously...
The problem I have with the Noahide movement is picking and choosing what you feel bound to keep, right? But once you start picking and choosing God's laws or what's ethically important to keep, but then you have already left the religion of Torah, or the belief system that appears in Torah. It's a completely different belief system, right? God gave a standard to live by because it's a formula. If you keep these laws, things improve in this world in every possible way. So whether you have a Jewish mother or not.
People who feel pressurized to convert and think, well, at least if I convert, reform, I've got something up. And so my point is, well, you're just joining people that are picking and choosing. And my concern of the Noahide thing, and I think I said it quite repeatedly through my talk, is what I saw about people at Noahide, the Noahide thing was, there was a couple of things. Some people were really concerned that it's half-baked, just a new thing, and so what am I going to do? I'm not wanting to just be a Gentile on the side. And so I didn't really believe that that's a huge problem. The second thing is, like, some of these people are just very reactionary. They've been in false religion, and they want to react against the people that you see that they call themselves, not hiding it anyway, because some of the things they say are not particularly nice, and it's no how a person would conduct themselves if they really were trying to get closer to God. So so my position is actually, as you stated, that a person accepts Torah upon themselves and say, right, this is how I'm going to live my life. But subsequent to that as well, I would say a person should not feel pressurized to convert to the religion that's currently known as Judaism.
Okay. All right, call it Torah Covenant. That's what we should do. Mm-hmm. We should start a movement called Torah Covenant. However, the ideal is that if you find a court that will convert you, right, a court of like-minded individuals, I'm not saying reform or conservative, it behooves you to help improve and build up the Jewish people. There's an actual law of Yeshivat Yisrael to establish and build up Israel, and that includes Israel the people. In other words, you have to go in there and rebuke the rabbis who are behaving incorrectly and try to fix Israel. That's clearly the ideal, right? It's not to just try to worship God alone, because repairing this world is a team effort. And that's the whole philosophy behind the people of Israel. It's an ethical force that was supposed to spread, and it did spread, but it didn't spread because of the Jews. It spread because of Christianity. It spread because of Islam to a certain extent. It's not to create some other belief system that I'm a Gentile who keeps the law. No. You are Israel already. That's it. By accepting God's commandments and entering the covenant, you are already Israel. You're just not accepted by the people of Israel because you haven't done a halachic, legal conversion. There's nothing metaphysical about it. Fine.
I mean, that's something. That's another point. Is like I hear people and I was concerned about the reason that I spoke to John about is just hearing some of the concerns that people have. And for me, I have no problem at all. So Bet-Dins and rabbis deciding. Really, I've really not got a huge problem with them deciding who's going to be a convert, because a person might choose to be Israel, but if I decided right now to be an American, right, it's not going to work out too well. I mean, I could buy all the same type of clothes, eat the same type of food, all the rest of it, but I've really not got citizenship of America. In the same way, Israel is a certain size of landmass and it's got security concerns. So of course,
that's the nation of Israel. Hold on.
No, but the point is that the religion did come from the nation. Says, I've given my laws to, I've given my Torah to you, not to other nations. I mean, so nations.
But Israel didn't come out of the geographical place called Israel. As a matter of fact,
the name is Israel, but the point
Israel in Torah is never called Israel. You understand? It's called the land of Israel, of the children of Israel. But so the children of Israel predated the land. Mm-hmm. So it has nothing to do with the country Israel. But you could be part of Israel and live in Russia and live in America.
But initially, we can't just pretend that these problems have not arisen before. These problems have been going on for a very long time about should people be allowed to join our nation.
Not that long. I mean, according to Jewish law, conversion takes
definitely
around 2 days.
Because the prophets had to address it. So that's how Christians kind of misuse bits of Jeremiah, where Jeremiah turns around and tells Jews that your circumcision is really not going to count. But your circumcision, listen, the way you are acting, like an Epstein, your circumcision isn't really going to count. What good do you think that's actually doing for you? So,
right. But there's no section in Torah or in Tanakh but that deals with whether we should let converts in or expand the Jewish people. I mean, that's obvious that you should. I mean,
historically, when they were in Babylon, historically at that point, then it was very okay for Gentiles to learn about the religion and such. But when they went back to land, if we read about it historically, then there was a real issue that there were groups within Israel who said, no, this is our religion, this is our God, and should we
hold on.
join this?
Well, the understanding was that the women that they married weren't women who were interested in keeping Torah. So Ezra told them to divorce your non-Hebrew brides or your non-believing brides. In other words, it's not that they in some way outlawed conversion. So why would they do that? Why would it? Do you think Ezra would have behaved like Chabad behaves today? That someone wants to come in and pray and convert and they just will slam the door on them?
I know, but people are naturally nationalistic and tribal. So that what I'm saying is this problem.
I don't think Ezra would be considered righteous, or anyone would have been considered righteous in Torah if they had that behavior towards people who actually wanted to enter the covenant.
I'm not saying that they would be counted as righteous, but what I'm saying is we can't pretend that this problem has not arisen before.
I don't see it in Tanakh, though.
Nationalistic people.
Yeah, we think that it's endorsed in some way by God. If it did arise before...
I'm not saying endorsed, I'm saying it's a problem. I mean, so of course if it's a problem, it's not endorsed. I'm saying that we can't pretend this problem it hasn't happened before, of voices within Israel saying...
Right, I'm saying that the Torah doesn't endorse it, Tanakh doesn't endorse it, so we should fight against it, not embrace it.
Well, what I would say, to be constructive, is, the other reason I spoke to John is, I listen to Mizraki sometimes, listen to yourself, listen to John. If you listen to Mizraki, the whole world is in the disaster zone, including the Jewish world. I mean, there's no lot, what I'm saying is there's no lot of positive light. You hear about horror stories, converts, why it's no good to be a Noahide. There's a lot of stuff. So something like you're saying about we should start a movement, well, maybe it'd be good to do a series of videos very positively if a person finds themselves, which there must be many of them. I mean, I can certainly think of one off the top of my head.
This isn't really a movement. I'm telling people to go back to the Torah. What does the Torah say?
The point is, what I'm saying is create some instructions for that, some guidance, and in an understandable way in the talks. Debates are useful to get so that people break up misconceptions and false ideas.
But the standards are already there. I mean, keep the oral law and the written law. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm saying is, I'm not sure somebody sitting down right now is going to get the whole picture out of this conversation. So what I'm saying is, it'd be more constructive. You're in a better position than me. It'd be more constructive if, maybe yourself and John or whatever, made videos and said, right, listen, so you find yourself, you're not in a position to convert, for whatever reason, fully to Judaism, but here's what you can do right now. Christian missionaries are doing every day of the week.
No, the thing is...
just 3 seconds here, right? Let's think about this. Christian ministries are not coming on and saying, no, the Christian world is at war with itself and various issues and all the rest of it, right? But they didn't fight against each other in the same way that you see Jews do. They're not saying, it's a disaster if you convert to that. It doesn't come across the same mess.
You're not liable for breaking laws that you don't know exist. If you take upon yourself the covenant, and for some reason there's laws in the Torah that you overlooked, so why would a good God punish you for that? Why would the Sanhedrin punish you for that? Right? So it doesn't matter if you're not able to keep it perfectly. You're keeping it to the best of your ability, and you're learning. There's tons of videos. Why should there be videos for Gentiles or people who haven't converted and videos for Jews or videos for rabbis? Everyone should learn the same Torah. Everyone should learn the same halacha. It doesn't change. That's the thing. So when you start creating all these classes, then you have offshoots. Then you have the Ger movement. Then you have Noahites. No, we have Jews, and we have Jews who are in transition. That's it.
So
you are halakhically in transition.
Guide people then specifically. So a person's not in a position to convert. Because they're not, let's just say they're not in a position for whatever reason. They stay 1,000,000 miles for a show, whatever, married to Gentiles, so they can't convert. So where do you say they should go to get the information that they can follow?
Mishneh Torah.
As they're a Gentile. So they've got a Humash. So right. And what's the name?
Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah is all online in English on Chabad.org, and that covers the complete oral law. Master that. Master the 5 books of Moses.
A person should do exactly what I've done. I've got the Mishneh Torah online, and I'm looking at buying one. I've got a Humash. So somebody, and exactly the thing I'm doing, which is what I told John that I do. So read the Humash, and I've got the Mishneh Torah online, and then I read that and study that and try to live by that. So that's essentially what you're saying a person who in my situation should do.
In every situation.
So maybe, and I've got no problem admitting it because I didn't like the word. So Noahide is not the position for a person to take. I don't know what the word is, and that's why I repeatedly refer to, because no other name I could think is righteous, Gentile, or whatever. It's no, And I didn't believe in...
Yeah, but you're not a Gentile, that's the thing. You are identifying with Israel. You are walking in God's ways. Why should you be considered one of the nations? I mean, that's beneath you. You are Israel. You're not halakhically Israel, but you're in transition. For all intents and purposes, you're Israel. From a Torah perspective, you're Israel. From a rabbinic perspective, you're not. Fine. So we have a principle that if you can't keep a law from a rabbinic perspective, you should still make an attempt to keep it from a Torah perspective. That's it. But don't throw Torah away. That's the thing. These guys trample on Torah by basically saying, we're going to choose what we want to keep outside of the 7 laws, right? We choose. So they've become their own God. What makes God great is that he knows what's good for us. He told us what's good for us. Not us picking and choosing. Well, that might as well be Christianity. That is Islam. So Torah is the key. Let's not abandon Torah. And by not doing that, we would not be abandoning God. Because it's really indistinguishable. We know about God because of Torah. That's why Torah is so valuable. But once we start reinterpreting Torah to in some way read differently, depending on who your mother is, then we've departed from the standard. That's it.
So would you say somebody then that has aligned themselves, as you're saying, instead of calling themselves a Noahide, they should call themselves an Israelite?
No. Say, I'm converting. I mean, clearly, like, you're not going to walk into a synagogue and say that I'm an Israelite, and then they're going to think that you mean that either your mother's Jewish or you converted, and they're going to count you in a minyan, and then that when they find out that your mother isn't Jewish and you didn't convert, they're going to be upset. No. Tell them I'm converting. I'm converting to your religion, but I keep Torah, and I'm in a Torah covenant with God. That's not between you and me. That's between me and God. Okay? One day, I'm going to join the physical people of Israel. That may be 10 years, 50 years down the line. You know what? It may never happen, but I'm trying. Okay? I'm doing the best I can. But I'm not departing God's words. I worship the God of Israel by keeping his laws. That's it. That's it. That's my argument.
Right. So the person just considers themselves as converting, and
from a rabbinic perspective, you're converting. From a Torah perspective, you're in a covenant. That's it.
Right. When I went to shul, the people asked me. So some of the people asked me afterwards, so are you on a journey? Which I took, it was their polite way, obviously, saying, are you converting? You see, I thought it was very interesting because obviously that's what's described.
You say you're Abraham. Converting, but you're not in a conversion process because you don't.
No, on a journey. That's just a UK thing, whether that's a term. But that was the term they asked me. Are you on a journey? They have the shul I went to. It's Orthodox, and they're part of the UK Orthodox conversion program or whatever it is. So if somebody applied in the UK. So the point is that the word that they used was journey, and I thought, well, that's actually quite good and relevant. I mean, that's how it described what Abraham is on a journey.
Rabbinic Judaism teaches that Gentiles should not keep Shabbat and should not study Torah. But what that actually means, being that conversion, when these rabbis made those statements, conversions took a day. The Rambam lumps this in to Gentiles creating their own religion. Their own religion. So
which I certainly disagree with people creating their own religion.
Right. So he's talking about idolaters, not people who want to enter Israel, because that's almost immediate. In other words, why would you ever think that someone who wants to enter Israel is not allowed to keep Shabbat or study Torah when conversion takes a day? No. The rabbis created a problem by making conversions impossible, and then they had the silly idea to say, well, we're going to classify all these people as idolaters, and thus they can't study Torah or keep Shabbat. But they can't have it both ways. They either fix the conversion program and eliminate the existence of a Noahide, because the only reason we have a Noahide or a Ger movement nowadays is because conversions are impossible. All these people, or the vast majority of them, just want to become Jewish, but they can't. So they have to join something. Right? I mean, humans have to be around other Jews or humans.
There's a problem. I mean, there's a problem that Abraham never had to join something, and neither did Noah. So, I think there's a problem that we've got that I see from the Christian world is in this Christian world people grow up in, they've got this problem they want to identify with a group, and so they want to join.
Yeah, Abraham circumcised his whole household and his slaves. In other words, he knew that the way you make an impact is with numbers. Now, clearly, he didn't join in,
Join. He created a group. He created a group rather than join it. And what my position, I suppose, is I'm trying to say that people don't have to join. Joining.
So you have to join.
It's not going to make you a person. It's not going to fix your life. It's not going to. It's no.
Abraham is considered the father of our faith because it began with him. In other words, only because Abraham started the movement that we call Judaism nowadays doesn't mean that everyone after him has to in some way create another movement as well. In other words, he created the family, whether physical or spiritual, of God's ambassadors on this planet. Okay? Our job is to build that family and fix that family if it's screwed up, which is the case nowadays. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's it.
And that's a very good example. Right?
All right, but anyways.
Okay, we'll keep talking. And I think constructively, it'd be great if we heard more positive. The stuff that you actually, as you described it earlier, about a person just choosing to take Torah on themselves, making a decision, just exactly as they still hear in other religions, make a decision, take Torah on them, and then begin to walk. And then, if it takes 20 years or never happens, they're progressing towards conversion. My own observation at this point, I'm not seeing any sense to conversion. If a person wants to be Jewish, then be Orthodox. I really didn't understand. That's my opinion. If a person wants to convert, so
in God's eyes, people are not liable for the commandments after they come out of the mikvah. You're liable for the commandments in God's eyes the day you know they're true. The day you're convinced they're true, that's when you're liable in God's eyes. Now, after the mikvah, you're liable to the Sanhedrin.
Right.
That's it. Yeah, but people make no distinction today. They fail to make that distinction. They think that the Sanhedrin is God or the rabbis make you Jewish. No, your conviction with God makes you Jewish or makes you in that covenant. That's it. So keep the laws because God wants you to keep the laws. And again, like we said, conversion was immediate back then. There wouldn't have been a group of people calling themselves Noahides because the rabbis just don't want to convert them, right?
No, that's great. There's a lot of positive stuff you said. There's a lot of good stuff that is kind of an extension of what I was trying to say with John. So, I kind of wish we could take all those bits out of this conversation and make them kind of clear for people that like I've got a lot of questions that obviously appear on your YouTube channel and on John's channel and such. That's great. Talking to Asher.
All right, Sean. Well, thanks for the call.
If ever it's October, I'll look you up.
I mean, come down here. We're riding motorcycles. We'll go down to the Keys.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Okay, good speech, Asher.